God's story, Paul's shipwreck. So part of God's story is about how Paul was shipwrecked, and it goes like this. Paul was a missionary. That means he traveled all over to tell people the good news of God's son, Jesus. This wasn't always safe for Paul to do because many people didn't believe Jesus is God's son. They thought Paul was dangerous, so they accused him of things he didn't do and threw him in jail. Paul and some other prisoners were put on a ship that was headed to Rome, where they would be put on trial. A Roman officer named Julius was in charge of Paul and the prisoners. He was kind to Paul, and before they left on their trip, he let Paul see his friends and get what they needed. It was going to be a very long, difficult trip. There were strong winds and big storms, and they had to change course over and over again. Paul knew that if they kept trying to sail in these rough waters, they might die. He tried to warn the officers, but they wouldn't listen. So they kept on sailing. And then things went from kind of windy to powerful hurricane-force winds. The sailor tried to steer the ship, but it was blown off course. The ship was out of control. The ship took a violent battering for days, and the men threw their cargo overboard to make the boat lighter. It was so dark that they couldn't see the sun during the day or the stars at night. Everyone started to give up hope, except Paul. Paul stood up in front of the others and told them to take courage, because not one of them would be lost. Only the ship would be destroyed. He told them that an angel of God appeared to him the night before and said, "Don't be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you." Paul told them that he trusted God and he knew God would keep his promise. Finally, after 14 long, cold, and scary nights, the sailors could see land approaching. And they were so eager to escape the sinking ship that they started lowering the lifeboats. But Paul told them that everyone needed to stay together on the boat, or no one would survive. So the officers cut the lifeboats free, and they all stayed together. Before the sun came up, Paul encouraged everyone to eat some food and build up their strength for what was about to happen. He knew that everyone was afraid, so he reminded them that God said everyone on the ship would be safe. After that, Paul took some bread and gave thanks to God in front of the others. Then they all ate together and were encouraged. Finally, they reached the shore, and even though the ship was smashed to pieces and destroyed, all 276 people survived, just as God had promised. At first, the soldiers planned to kill the prisoners so that none of them would escape, but the officer, Julius, wanted to spare Paul's life, so Julius convinced the soldiers to let the prisoners live. Once everyone was finally on shore, the people who lived on the island came out to welcome them. They showed kindness to all the prisoners and soldiers and built a fire to keep them warm. Later, while Paul was gathering wood, he was bitten by a venomous viper. Kids, do you know what a venomous viper is? It's a dangerous, even deadly snake. Maybe Paul thought he was going to die, but instead, God kept him safe. After that, the leader of the island welcomed everyone to his home and took care of them for 3 days. The leader's father was very sick, though, so Paul prayed and placed his hands on the sick man, and he was healed. When people heard about this, every other sick person on the island came to see Paul, and they were healed too. Paul trusted that God would take care of them and give them what they needed, and that's exactly what God did. And amidst all those scary things that were happening, Paul chose to give thanks to God. He eventually made it to Rome, just like God had said, and he was able to keep preaching the good news wherever he went. And that's the story of how Paul was shipwrecked and rescued by God. So, in case you missed it, here's the quick version. Paul was a prisoner. He was taken on a ship. There was a storm. Everyone was afraid. God promised to keep them safe. They ate and gave thanks. They shipwrecked on an island. The people there took care of them. God used Paul to heal every sick person on the island. Paul kept preaching the good news. And that's a part of God's story.